Hello, I'm Toycat and welcome back to another second channel geography video. This is a series where I talk about geography and the world and stuff. And today I wanted to talk about a particularly interesting part of world geography, which I've never really liked because it always seemed at least a little bit arbitrary, and that is the idea of continents. So continents make sense on paper because we need some way to subdivide the world, but it always seems so arbitrary that there's no official land gap between most continents. It's just a culture thing that we as humans decide, and therefore it's like, well, I mean, it seems a bit unofficial, and there's a lot of different ways to define continents, as you'll see in this little map right here. You can go from anywhere from 4 to 7 continents. I'll show you all the models, but for today's video we're going to be talking about the 7 continent model you just saw, with North America, South America, Africa, Australasia or Oceania, Antarctica, and Asia, so I think I missed one there. But the 7 continents that you just saw, we're going to be going over those today, and we're going to be talking about transcontinental countries. So yeah, here's the last 5 continent model, and then here's the 4 continent model, which is the only one you can officially, this one here by the way, is the only one you can really officially use if you're only using natural boundaries, but this is the one we're talking about today, and we're going to be talking about countries which are on more than one of those continents contiguously. It has to be contiguous because otherwise, if it's not continuous, then it's going to be, basically you can include islands, or you can include France is like being on 6 continents, but we're going to be talking mostly about contiguous countries, because then you can like hop from one part of the country to the other part on foot in some way from one part to the other, which is kind of like a nuts thing, like the continental divide, but it actually occurs in lots of cases. Most people know Russia because Russia is so huge that it has to be on 2 continents, but there's actually 5 other countries which exist in this way, and I want to talk about each of them in today's video. So let's go straight into the very first one, which is actually, what to be of North and South America. It's the only example which doesn't involve Asia, because again, Asia is such a cultural divide for a continent. But we're going to be talking about the North America, South America divide. So yeah, this is the only divide which has, it's one of the few divides where it's kind of like disputed by a lot of the people across that divide, because a lot of people in Latin America don't like to admit there is a North-South America divide, or in fact in their language, there's like ambiguity about just the Americas, which is why, by the way, a lot of Spanish and Portuguese speakers get upset when Americans call themselves Americans, or when people call them Americans, because America should be all of the 2 continents, people from the Americas. But to people from the United States, they are Americans, and that's why the big divide between Latin Americans and Americans comes up, because of the whole language barrier. In English, we call this Americans, and in Latin, or not in Latin, but in Spanish and Portuguese speakers, which is what Latin America means, it actually includes all of this. So fun fact about the Americas you might not know. But yeah, basically there is a divide between the 2 Americas, which is Panama, and you can roughly, there's 2 different definitions. The natural one is using the Darien mountain range, which includes a tiny bit of Panama in South America, and the more widely considered one, which makes no sense because we built it ourselves, is the divide between Panama, which the Panama Canal. So the Panama Canal is one of the most ridiculous feats we've achieved as humans, I'd say. Obviously we could probably do something bigger now, but the fact that we did this a couple of 100 years ago is really nuts in my opinion. But basically we built the Panama Canal, which is a gap between North and South America. It's the only point where they're not officially joined, so that we could avoid going all the way around South America and just cut right across instead. So yeah, the Panama Canal is right over here, as you can see. Again, this was besides the natural part in the middle, this was dug to some extent by people. And to give you an idea of just how the scale of this thing, because it really is nuts to me, let me go into one of these little bubbles and show this is the depth and the width of it, and this went on for miles all the way across a continent. We divided a continent ourselves, and I think that's nuts personally. So yeah, that's one of the things we did in Panama. The Panama Canal is a thing that I think as a human you can be pretty proud of, but the reason it's so important and interesting is because it means that Panama is roughly divided between North and South America. Even though most statistics say it's just a North American country, it means that it's one of the more evenly divided countries between 2 continents. Most transcontinental countries, by any definition, are really just here's a tiny bit over there and a little bit over there, but Panama's land area, as you can see, is roughly 50-50, which is nice if you ask me. And just, for a fun fact while we're here, because I figure, there's so many, just while we're talking about little places like this and that, I'll go with a little fun place name every now and then. So next to the Panama Canal place I just showed you, literally just next door, there's somewhere called the City of Knowledge. Isn't that a great name for a place? And what I love about this city, I looked into it, it actually is named the City of Knowledge because there's so many academic universities and stuff, as well as governmental agencies, as well as tech centers, and I just love that the City of Knowledge actually is a City of Knowledge next to the Panama Canal, and very, very vaguely in South America by one definition of the word at least. So yeah, fun fact before we move on to the next country, which is transcontinental. Like I said, there's only one North American, South American example. The next one involves Africa and Asia, and it's probably, and again, it's a more well-known one, it is Egypt. So this is by almost every source considered to be transcontinental. It is the Egypt, divide, where a little bit of their country goes on the other side of the Suez Canal. Again, it's really weird how we define continents because we want to do it by natural barriers, but in the second case here, so that was defined by at least most people as the Panama Canal being the border. In this case, this is defined by most people as the Suez Canal being the gap between the two. So yeah, if you don't know, the Suez Canal is this thing right here. It cuts right through Africa and Asia, leads to this big gap. It's named after the city of Suez down here, if you're curious, and it's also really well known for being the cause of one of the biggest crises in the last like 50 years, and being pretty much the reason for the downfall of the British Empire. Like the last big, when the British Empire stopped being like a global superpower, was because of the Suez Crisis, where they had to be like, well, the US told us not to do something, and we literally have to. So yeah, that's a fun little fact you might not have known. This canal right here is the cause for that, because this is really important in global shipping. For the same reason that, cutting through South America saved a lot of time with boats. Imagine the amount of time it saves for someone like Greece or Italy to just cut through there to get to India, as opposed to like, you can imagine. So yeah, basically, Suez Canal is the divide between Africa and Asia, and because of that, Egypt has, some of its territory in Africa, most of it, the famous part of it in Africa, and then a little bit here in Asia, or in the Middle East, which some would consider its own continent, but it's not really. It's just a part of Asia, which means that, yeah, we got Africa split between the two. And as a fun fact, you can see on the map here, out of Africa's, regions, they actually have two of them split between continents too. So two of Africa's little regions, their actual names for them, basically they have two of these split between two continents, as well as two over here, and the vast majority of Africa exists over here. Again, it's one of these cases where it's like African Egypt, Asian Egypt, and it goes right up to Israel, which is, again, just a wonderful neighbor to have, I think. So with that said, let's move on to the next example of a transcontinental country, and all of these examples we're going to go through in a row here are kind of like really small ones, because there is three gaps between Asia and Europe. In a way, there is this one right here, there's this one right here, and then there's the one which goes through Russia. So first we'll talk about the Trans-Caucasus one. It's the least exciting one, but we should go through it a little bit, because as you can see, we've got Azerbaijan and we've got Georgia, which are both transcontinental countries, because the barest bit of them is included in Europe. Like the borderline is roughly drawn along here, and as you can see, that means a tiny bit of Azerbaijan is included in Europe. That means a tiny bit of Georgia is included in Europe, which means they are officially allowed to go into a bunch of like European competition stuff, including Eurovision. So I guess we'll judge Eurovision as the official border of Europe. But yeah, that means that a tiny bit of Azerbaijan and Georgia are European, so they have like this slight European claim. They get onto the Council of Europe. A bunch of stuff like that they get into because they are slightly European, even though it includes only the tiniest bit of Azerbaijan's territory and the tiniest bit of Georgia's. However, this is two countries I've just mentioned, so that's 3 and 4 transcontinental. However, because Georgia has two unrecognized countries, and they're not really countries by most definitions, but if you agree with the whole like these people agree they're different countries, so we'll let them do that, then South Ossetia and Abkhazia, I believe, are both also transcontinental for 4 separate countries while we're here. And since I said I'd go with a fun place name whenever one came up on screen, you know what? There's a city here in Azerbaijan, in Asian Azerbaijan, but still in Azerbaijan, called Ganja. So there you go. That's exciting stuff right there. But let's move on to the next example though, which is Turkey. So Turkey is probably the most famous crossing between continents, because again, no one really goes to Panama to be like, well, one of my feet is in North America and one in South. Mostly because even they don't really agree this to Americas. Most people don't go to Georgia or Azerbaijan, like, do you even know which cities are split? However, a lot of people do know the Istanbul crossing. This is the gateway to Asia, the biggest crossing, and one of the biggest cities in the world. If you don't know Istanbul, it's funny because I didn't know this until I started making these videos, but some people are genuinely offended at the term Istanbul. They insist on it being called Constantinople. So, yeah, I will call it by its old Roman name from 500 years ago or so. Istanbul, or Constantinople, this city over here, is one of the world's largest cities. How you measure it as being like the 10th largest or the 12th largest or the 15th largest depends on its exactly where you define the boundaries. As you can see, it's got some of the messiest city boundaries in the world. Look at this. This is their real boundaries of their city. But yeah, this is one of the largest cities on Earth, with over 15 million people living in this area. And yeah, with this area on the left of the river, it's the Bosphorus if I'm not mistaken, being called European Turkey, and the area to the right of it being Asian Turkey. And it's not just notable because it's like, oh yeah, some of European Turkey's there and some is of Asian Turkey's there, but Istanbul itself is split between the two sides, not evenly, but close to evenly, as closer to evenly than one would expect with a city like this, close to evenly than some cities do ever go, which is kind of nuts if you ask me. And also, because of its, incredibly valuable position, it is very heavily militarized. It's very heavily, basically, it's a very important city in the world. It's one of the world's largest cities. If you count the whole thing as being a European city, it's larger than London. It's larger than Moscow, I believe, too. It's it's pretty nuts the size of the city. And yeah, that is Istanbul. In case you're curious, by the way, you can cross this via, I think it's only like 3 3 separate bridges, but there's an underground, like, literally an underwater railway too, so that's kind of cool. And there's a bunch of ferry crossings to this day. Look how many ferry crossings that is, which is, it's fascinating to me that, like, we have this river, and to this day we're still using boats rather than, like, fixed bridges for the most part. So yeah, if you want to have one foot on one continent, one on the other, somewhere in the middle of this bridge is where you'd consider that. But I don't know if I necessarily recommend that. But that is European Turkey. Also, as a fun fact, just because like I feel like this is slightly relevant, the only reason there is any European Turkey left is because at the end of the Balkan Wars, a lot of the Balkan countries were trying to get the Ottomans to leave, and they were doing it with force because that's how that went. But I think they were they were all slowly kicking Turkey out of Europe, basically, slowly by moving the borders back. But because they started fighting each other, Turkey got to keep this little bit of Europe right here. So that's the very vaguest of history. Now you know it. So that's why Turkey is slightly in Europe still. It used to be a giant Ottoman Empire that went way further out, including, Bulgaria and stuff like that. But now it's all the way back over here. So yeah, with that said, let's move on from Turkey to the next example. You might be thinking, there's only Russia left, right? Like, if you're talking about Asia and Europe, then only Russia is transcontinental. But technically, Kazakhstan is transcontinental too. So yeah, Kazakhstan, this country right here, is one of the world's largest countries by land area. Not by population, but by land area, it's pretty darn big. Look at the size of this thing. It's like, it's almost an India in itself. So yeah, basically, Kazakhstan, this country right here, is actually transcontinental between Europe and Asia in the same way that Russia is. So yeah, basically there is a river around here. It's called the Ural River. The Ural River is generally considered to be the boundary between Asia and Europe, which means that a tiny portion, just under 1 million of the Kazakhstan's 15 million population, lives on this side of the river and is therefore European Kazakhstan. And again, by that same definition, I believe they're allowed to join like the European Cup, like not World Cup, the European like football cup or whatever. They're allowed to join a few European sport competitions. They might even be allowed in Eurovision, your official decider. Although most of their territory, their culture, their population, as Kazakhstan is Asian. However, like I said, the Ural River follows up here. It goes to Uralsk, which is actually, again, another city where you can cross this bridge, have 1 foot in Asia and 1 foot in Europe. I don't think anyone does that based on the size of this and the size of Uralsk being a very small city as it is. But yeah, basically, because, it's not small, but it's like small in comparison to global standards. Basically, there is a crossing between Europe and Asia, and it actually goes for quite some distance. And it goes all the way along here, along the Europe-Russia border, which, by the way, before we leave here, because again, I said I'd point out fun place names when we walk past them. There is a city around here somewhere. No, I've lost it. It's called like Alexova. We'll just zoom in for a little bit, go back into this, and follow the river along here, because as you can see, it squiggles in and out. It goes in, it goes out. It goes through really weird things because the border hasn't updated with the river. So you get this part of Russia, which is like on the Kazakhstan side, and you get this part of like you get some parts of Kazakhstan, which are on the, the Russia side, which means that this part right here is technically European Russia. There's this tiniest bit, because it's on the wrong side of the Ural, that is both belonging to Kazakhstan and Russia. There's nothing there. I'd say, probably a good opportunity to claim land. I mean, Russia's nearby, so I wouldn't give it a try. But you could do it, in theory, one could argue, because again, the border does not follow the Ural River very well at all, and at least to weird situations like this, but it's a thing that exists. And then the river goes this way till it reaches the Ural Mountains, and it reaches Russia, the way more interesting transcontinental country. So how is Russia transcontinental? That's the big question I wanted to answer, because when I was in school, when the very first time you pointed at the map, and we're like, okay, so where are you from? And you think the UK is a big country. I think most people did, even if you don't live there. And then you're like, oh, it's this island. And then you're like, oh, that's the size of the map. Pretty small, actually. Like, it's fairly big, but it's small in comparison to the world. I imagine, like, if you're Russian and you're in school, and you're like, how big is the Russia, comrade? Or terrible Russian accent, I'm sorry. But, they look at the map and they're like, whoa, are we that big? Like, that can't all be us. All the way over there, too? But yeah, Russia basically has a similar thing to the US, but literally the opposite direction, where they were a fairly big country at first anyway, when they started, like, exploring. Like, they included most of European Russia, which is about over here, by the way. Again, about that. They were mostly European Russia, and then they just started exploring east, and there was only really natives there, and they did the US strategy of like, well, if there's only natives there, we just have to kill the natives, and then it's our land. So yeah, they killed a bunch of natives, just explored the heck out of the east. Like, seriously, look at the distance between East and West Russia. It's nuts, and it even used to include Alaska. This was Russian America at one point, which means the end-to-end distance of, I'll show you right here, actually. The end-to-end distance of Russia is like nuts. The end-to-end distance is so long, it goes above the fastest point between what used to be the edge of Russia and the start of it used to be above the North Pole. And even if you want to go from, this side to that side, you still want to go mostly around it, because it's just so big. Russia is huge. And although some of that is because of the Mercator projection, it is still a huge continent. However, even though most of Russia, geographically is in Asia. So this is the true size of Russia when you don't include Mercator projection. Even though Russia is mostly in Asia, as you can see, all of this is Asian Russia. Most of it is just inhabited by small native tribes, or like there is a couple of big cities, over here as you can see, and also there's a really famous one over here, Vladivostok, with they've got like one of their ports there. But basically, Russia is a huge country, and most of it's in Asia, and they have some Asian people which look like this. These are Russians. You picture Russians as being the Slavs in the East, the Eastern Europeans, but you actually get these are Russian people, which is weird to imagine. These are the Yakuts, if I'm not mistaken. But most of the population of Russia lives over here, so most of the culture of Russia comes from here, and that's why when you picture Russia, you picture Moscow, or you picture somewhere in this general region. You're not picturing you're not picturing Vladivostok, or you're not picturing one of these tiny villages, because that doesn't come up in the media very often, because that's not the bulk of Russia's population. Like, when you center by population, this is really where Russia is. That's why they have their two most known and biggest cities, Moscow and St. Petersburg, so close together and so far to the west of their country. They get west, right? Yeah, they're so far to the west of the country, and that's also, by the way, why you might be like, how is Russia ever scared of being invaded? They've proven time and time again that it's like near impossible to do so. Well, really, once you go past Belarus, Ukraine, Latvia, Estonia, it's not that far to reach their capital, and it's especially not that far to reach St. Petersburg from either Helsinki or any of these cities. And that's why, even though Russia has this huge amount of land that you might think is like basically entirely fortified because it's so mountainous, it's mountainous and fortified after you go past the population, and the population is what they're most scared about. So yeah, an accurate map of Russia, realistically, like, I know that you're excluding like 25% of their population, but if you just cut the border here, you get a more realistic view of like, Russia is big, Russia is really big, and it's the biggest country on Earth, but like most of that land isn't usable yet. And yeah, there you go, Russia is a transcontinental country. And as a fun fact, I was considering making a whole video on this, but Russia will benefit very greatly from global warming because so much of their territory is in the Arctic Circle. Like, you can see just like, how much is Arctic and unusable, but that becomes more usable as global temperatures rise. So fun fact, Russia benefits from global warming. Make a conspiracy theory from it, just saying. And yeah, one more thing before we go, because I said I'd talk about it a little bit. I only spoke about contiguous countries today, the 6 countries where you can literally hop from one side to the other, because if you talk about non-contiguous, i.e. like things that are owned by the country, or even where the country officially just says it's there, you get stuff like, oh yeah, well, France is on technically 5 or 6 continents, because that. They're in North America, they're in South America, they're in Africa, they're in Australasia, in the Polynesia area, they're in Asia somewhere. But it's like, that's kind of cheating, right? France isn't on 6 continents, it's on 1. I can see it. Although if you want to consider that, because French Guiana is officially just French territory, their president is Emmanuel Macron, they use the euro. This is just France, as far as France is concerned. Because of that, there's a fun little diagram I love to pull out. It's one of my favorite maps of all time. Map diagrams of all time. It is the diagram of how many Eiffel Towers in South America by country, and as you can see, officially, there is 1 Eiffel Tower per this country right here, because it's France. So yeah, fun little fact you might not know. But yeah, I love this diagram. But in general, there's a lot of countries that are transcontinental by this second definition. I could go through all of them, but Denmark is one because of Greenland. Greenland's in North America. The UK is one because it has lots of overseas territories, including literally owning a part of Antarctica, or claiming to own part of Antarctica, and also the Falkland Islands, which, for the record, I did too little time to go on little side tangents. UK, France, Spain, Portugal. There's also Denmark. There's also Norway to some extent. One could argue. Basically, every country can have an argument for that being transcontinental. Australia. Every country has a definite a way to argue that, but I don't really like it too much, so I only argued about the 6 ones that actually are. So one more thing before I go, because I want to say it anyway. The Falkland Islands over here are actually only called the Falkland Islands on UK Google Maps. I made a video about how Google Maps changes based on your country. The Falkland Islands on every other map, including yours, if you don't live in the UK, will say Falkland Islands, brackets, Islas Maldivas, the Argentinian name. And there's a fun fact you might not have known. The Falkland Islands, this is the one thing that changes just for the UK Google Maps, and I didn't realize that when I made my video, but now I do. So yeah, one more thing before we go, make sure you check out today's sponsor, which is myself and my Amazon link. If you get Amazon Prime using a link in the description, I get $3, I think, and I'd like $3. So if you don't have Amazon Prime, you need it, and I need $3. So anyway, that's my sponsor for today. High quality stuff, second channel, don't care, goodbye.